Foundation, actually locating your core. When we think about the body, so this is kind of the nitty-gritty section of the training now as far as like talking about the skinny, more on anatomy. When we think about actually locating our core, we're thinking about 3 layers to the core. We kind of talked a little bit about that yesterday. So the first one I have is the local core muscles. So these are the muscles that are the deepest in the body, the closest to the inside, the closest to the bone. These are our stabilizers, okay? So when we think about stabilizing, it's that concept of the most stability we talked about yesterday with Stuart McGill and Gary Gray, and this idea that we can't be mobile unless we're first stable. A baby never learns to walk before it learns to stand. It never learns to run before it learns to walk. This idea. When we think about exercise, many of the movements and many of the exercises out there are premature to someone's body, meaning we're doing all this movement, but yet people can't even stand on their own 2 feet. So it's kind of that concept. In the yoga community, it's why are you standing on your head if you can't stand on your own 2 feet? It's an interesting question to ask. And when we think about our core, this is going to be true with core work. If we're yanking, pulling, and moving on our body, but yet we can't even hold, like we did on the ball, and just let the core feel stability, we're not ready for movement yet. So the reality comes, as far as core work goes, or functional movement, we do in fact have to slow things down a little bit and have to feel more and maybe move less, momentarily at least. So the first muscle is going to be the multifidus. So when we think about the multifidus spans 1 to 3 vertebrae at a time from the bottom to the top of our spine. The multifidus is a stabilizer, stabilizing 1 to 3 vertebrae at a time. So this isn't a big muscle, and when you think about it as in terms of one big one layering down the spine, but rather many little ones overlapping as they move up the back. When we think about the multifidus is going to be really important in that neutral spine. The ability to keep our vertebrae where they belong and keep the discs and vertebrae sitting appropriately how they should be. The next one is going to be the transverse abdominal, which is our deepest core muscle. When we think about the transverse abdominal, we want to think of it like a hoop or almost like a corset. I try to be very careful with the corset word because I know that that's a term used in the Pilates community, and we have this idea of sucking in, and I don't want you to think about that when I say the word corset. I more so want you to think about the idea of just this really great structural support for the body. All right, so the next local layer is going to be the transverse abdominal. This is going to be a hoop-like muscle, so thinking about it surrounding the entire torso and supporting the spine. This is our spinal stabilizer, or one of the 2. And on page 118 in the key muscles of Hatha Yoga, we're looking at probably what I have found to be one of the best pictures as far as the layering process goes. Now it's not going to be in the layers that I'm talking about, but you can see these muscles pulled apart a little bit more easily. So if you look at that level 1, that transverse abdominal on page 118, you can see that it is in fact a fairly large muscle covering the torso. And again, it is deeper than the obliques, deeper than the rectus abdominis. And so that gives us this clue that it is in fact closest to the spine and the most supportive. That being said, this muscle is not meant to be sucked in and drawn in on the spine, bringing even more compression to the spine than we need. This idea of stiffening or co-contracting, where all the muscles together with that transversus actually start to stabilize the spine more effectively. So later on, we're going to talk about language, and the kind of language that we use in class will make or break also our students' experiences, because we don't always know what they've done before, and if we use terms like navel to spine or even the word stiffening, I always make sure I follow up with a description of what I mean so that they can create a new memory for words that they may have heard before and they had a different idea or a different description from their past experiences. So when we think about stiffening or utilizing that transversus, if you bring your hands to your waistline and just cough, you can feel probably the obliques and rectus, but beneath that, that transversus muscle is pulsing. It's contracting. We're feeling that stiffening. So the idea of coughing, you just feel that little draw in, that little effectiveness, rather than the big hollowing or sucking in. Okay? So that probably is one of the best examples to have yourself feel that co-contraction happen. One of the things we want to think about with the transverse abdominal is that this muscle will have what's called a delayed onset if it's not functioning properly. So what I mean by that is, let's say we're familiar with the Pilates 100, pumping your arms up and down, okay, on the floor, or something like the scissors, scissoring your legs up and down while you're on your back. So if the trunk, particularly this transverse abdominal, is not strong enough to support that, you will already be experiencing the movement, and that core muscle, that transversus, has to go from 0 to 60 in a delayed way. It's not ready for it. It's not jump-started. So we really want to think about that stability before mobility so we don't have that delayed onset, meaning damage to the spine. Okay? So if the core is not ready to do an exercise and we're doing it, we're utilizing other muscle groups, damage can happen. This idea of the co-contracting, and we think about normal movement, this idea of being stiff and stable, our body is ready for our appendages and our limbs to start moving. So let's say I would come onto my back. Let's say I'm going to put the ball back here. And I am going to do something like the 100, okay? I'm off the mat, which you know is a big thing with functional movement. I'm going to start moving my arms. But if I'm going to start moving my arms and I'm all over myself like this, pumping, trying to keep myself stable, my transversus muscle is just at a jar trying to figure out what to do. Versus if I first find neutral, I first create that co-contracting or that stiffening among other movements. And the reality of the fact is this hoop-like containment might tell me that I'm not even ready to start moving my appendages. Okay? Even though in my mind, in my ego, I want to do this so bad, but I'm just everywhere on the ball, that deep stabilizer says all I can do now is stabilize. Like the baby, I'm not ready to walk yet. I first just need to learn how to stand. And that's the tricky thing about core work, is we kind of have to move backwards, move backwards in order to move forwards because we're so used to being taught, move, keep doing this, keep up, don't stop. And we kind of have to go back and undo all of that type of thinking. So as teachers or as students in our own practice, and we think about core movement, we first always want to ask ourselves, can I just hold this? Remember how I had you come forward in that functional warrior into that forward flexion? I just had you hold for a second just to kind of create that muscle memory for the body and then come back up just to see if the body could function that way, just to see if the body could move that way versus just having you go up and down until the cows came home. So when we think about movement, getting out of the car, throwing yourself out of the car versus thinking, okay, what components do I need to use in my body until it becomes automatic? Remember the conversation yesterday. When you get up from gardening, you don't just throw your back out. It doesn't just randomly happen. It's been building up for a long period of time. So this idea of this transversus, we also have to build this muscle up to create more stability so it becomes automatic. It knows how to turn on. And the reality is many of our bodies do not know how to do that. Would you agree? We don't know how to turn this on unless we think about it. Oh yeah, activate. Oh yeah, activate. Till eventually it's, oh yeah, activate, and it does it by itself. Everything is a core movement. These muscles prove that. We need these muscles in order to survive, in order to sit upright, in order to support the spine, in order to have more stability in the hips and pelvis, in order to support our lungs. We need these deep muscles. So aside from the multifidus and aside from the transversus, the next one is going to be the diaphragm. So when we think about the diaphragm, sit up tall and bring your hand to your diaphragm area. And I know my teacher trainers will know the answer to this already, but when you take an inhale, what happens? The diaphragm goes down. What happens when you exhale? It goes up and massages the heart. Oh, cardiac muscle. Okay? So it's coming up like a nice little pillow and massaging the heart as you exhale. It's inhaling, pushing down. So this is a huge muscle, moving our inner organs, moving and stimulating our heart, and it's also the front barrier on our chest. So when we inhale and exhale and we're breathing and we inhale, the diaphragm moves down and it really helps protrude their lungs wide, which goes back to our theory of we want more side body and back body breathing rather than lower belly breathing, especially in exercise. The idea is that we need our core. to move, in order to function. And at a very basic level, the idea is that we want core containment at least 5% load during the day. What that means is the core never fully goes off in blob-like motion, okay? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need my core to lift my groceries. Has to turn on again. And then it goes off again. Oh, I got to lift my kid. And it turns back on. Or I'm going to hammer a nail. Turns back on. No, it's always at that idle, okay? Like a car on a drag race, it's idling. You're not going to turn the key and then try to rev it. You're going to have that idling ready to go, foot on the gas, so that when you take off, it already knows what it's supposed to do. So the idea of healthy core work is it's always working at least 5%. Okay? And when we think about diaphragm, transversus, and multifidus, those muscles are ready for action at any time. It doesn't mean that you're walking around with a really strong, stiff core. It's like, look at me, I'm making a muscle. Absolutely not. Right now I'm utilizing my core muscle as I'm sitting upright. You know, I can breathe, I can talk, I can function, but there's activation there. That's the idea, okay? That's good functional core work. As we go down that, the last one is the pelvic floor. When we think about the pelvic floor in that local layer, okay, if you turn to your sheet that shows the picture of the pelvic floor, okay, shows the picture of the pelvic floor. This is just a very nice general picture. In level 2, we get to look at it from an internal approach, 3D, really fun. But this is just a little bit more gender neutral as far as really easy to kind of depict what's going on. You look at the pubic bone in the front by the pelvis, okay? Then you look at the coccyx in the back of the body. Then you look at the ischial tuberosities on each side, the sit bones, and it creates, look at the bottom picture, a nice diamond or a kite shape. And in our pelvic floor exercises that we do, we're going to be segmenting all of this, okay? And we'll do that here in a little bit. But when we think about the pelvic floor, front to back, side to side, this is a really important visual to get for not only yourself as a teacher, but for students, to get that point across. Remember how I said it was kind of like the bottom of your pants? And in today's world, especially for women's exercise pants, there's that vent cut out for you, and it's in a triangular shape. It's the shape of your pelvic floor, okay? It's the exact shape of that. So that's the area that we're feeling that upward contraction. When we go through our pelvic floor exercises, we'll talk more about this in detail, but there's 3 points of contraction, okay? So anal sphincter, the anal sphincter is actually a muscle 2 to 3 centimeters long. So you're actually able to retract inward. All right, this is going to be important for hemorrhoids. This is going to be really important for rectal function. This is going to be really important for the excretory system. All right, we need this area to contract. And what you'll find for most people, this may be one of the easier areas for them to contract. So when you're sitting here right now, just think about trying to draw in only on that anal sphincter. Now, it's not the glutes. So we know that there's dysfunction when people try to squeeze their booty in order to activate this area. Okay? So I really like to break them up and maybe only focus on one area, especially with new students, and so otherwise they feel very overwhelmed and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm used to Kegels, I'm used to squeezing, I don't even know what I'm used to, I'm not used to anything. So just kind of slowly bringing this in. The next area for women is going to be that vaginal passageway. For men, if you think about where the scrotum sits, that tissue right behind the scrotum, what looks like caves down, but when you exhale and draw in on that pelvic floor, it actually domes up. Okay, so it's drawing up. For on a very basic level, I like to tell my men, it's like flexing an erection. That's really the muscle that you're using, is the pelvic floor, is the perineum when you're doing that action. So that idea, that concept really holds true. If I put a rod down the middle of my body to my pelvic floor, dead center, that's what I'm hitting. I'm hitting that perineum muscle that runs right down the center from tailbone to pubis bone, but it's very chunky, very hardy in the middle. So I'm drawing up. For women, it's a hugging in, like on intercourse, or like hugging in on a tampon. You're drawing in and you're holding. Okay, so when I said we're going to be using words and talking in language that we're not used to, this is the reality of the body. We have these body parts, and we need to learn how to use them, and nobody's talking about them. Nobody's telling people what's really going on down here and how to use it. So we use general terms like activate your core. Well, my students here know when I say that what I mean now, but we just use navel to spine or squeeze your glutes. Oh my gosh, no, don't say that. We're turning off areas that should be turned on. This should be a huge concern in any type of exercise, this area of the body, that I want my students to leave going, I at least know that this area exists now. So when we go forward of the perineum, we're going to hit that urethra point. So if we think where the pubis bone is, and we think then up, I'm just moving more externally in a way, this tissue here, which is an area for, especially for women, that they often complain is like the problem area between the hip bones and the pubis bone, pelvic floor. They need more work with the pelvic floor. They need more transversus stimulation with that area if this is an area of concern. And obviously we can look at it energetically. We can also look at the systems of the body to see where there's dysfunction as well. But when we activate on that perineum and then on the urethra, I'm feeling this now a little bit more draw in, maybe a little bit more physically or externally. I'm noticing that when I draw in on my belly, okay? Or I draw up on my pelvic floor. So that urethra is going to put compression on the bladder, and that's what makes me feel like that area is drawing in slightly. And we're going to do 15 plus exercises to get this point across, and you will leave feeling like, okay, I have tools I can utilize in my class, and there is no way, shape, or form that you can misunderstand these areas of the body. So right now we're just kind of lecturing, but we will do major hands-on on this, and you will hopefully feel those bones and those muscles very much present. Okay, so local level, we have multifidus, we have transverse abdominal, we have diaphragm, and we have the muscles of the pelvic floor. Now in level 2, we look at the pelvic floor and we break down all those little muscles that we just are kind of generalizing areas right now, and we get down to the nitty-gritty of kind of where muscles are, where they're attaching, how they're crossing, that type of thing, to really kind of wrap your head around that. But for right now, this is an awesome place to start, and if all you ever learn is this, your students will be very happy with it.